Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about something that affects every single one of us. Something that has probably caused you more suffering than you realize, and something that the Stoics understood could be completely eliminated from human experience. We're going to talk about disappointment. Now, I want you to think for a moment about the last time you were truly disappointed. Really disappointed. Maybe it was a job you didn't get, a relationship that ended, an investment that failed, a friend who let you down, or simply rain ruining your perfectly planned day. Feel that sensation for a moment, that sinking feeling in your chest, that bitter taste of reality not matching what you had hoped for. What I'm going to tell you today will fundamentally change how you experience disappointment. Not reduce it, not manage it better, but eliminate it entirely. And before you think this sounds too good to be true, or that this would somehow make you passive or uncaring, let me assure you that what I'm about to share with you is perhaps the most liberating, philosophical insight ever discovered, and it comes from minds that have been tested by slavery, war, exile, and every form of human suffering imaginable. The Stoics discovered something remarkable. Disappointment is not caused by external events. It is not caused by other people's behavior. It is not caused by outcomes beyond our control. Disappointment is caused by one thing and one thing only: the gap between our expectations and reality. And here's the revolutionary part. This gap is entirely within our control to eliminate. Epictetus, who knew a thing or two about disappointment having spent years as a slave, said something that cuts right to the heart of this issue. What troubles men is not things, but the judgments they make of things. When we are disappointed, we are not disappointed by what happened. We are disappointed by the judgment we made about what should have happened versus what actually happened. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you apply for a job you really want. You prepare extensively, you nail the interview, you feel confident. Then you get the rejection email. The disappointment hits like a physical blow. But here's what's actually happening. You're not disappointed by the rejection itself. You're disappointed because you had created an expectation, a mental image of yourself getting the job, and reality failed to match that image. Now, someone might say, but of course I expected to get the job. I worked hard for it. I was qualified. I did everything right. And that's exactly the problem. You confused effort with entitlement. You confused preparation with guarantee. You confused wanting something with deserving it. The Stoics would tell you that your disappointment has nothing to do with not getting the job and everything to do with the expectation you created that you would get it. The expectation was your creation, your mental projection, your judgment about how reality should unfold. And when reality didn't conform to your judgment, you suffered. But here's where it gets interesting. What if I told you that you could have prepared just as thoroughly, wanted the job just as much, performed just as well in the interview, but experienced zero disappointment when you didn't get it? What if I told you that this isn't just possible, but that it's actually the natural state of a rational human being? The key lies in understanding what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. There are things that depend on us, and there are things that do not depend on us. The moment we emotionally invest ourselves in outcomes that do not depend on us, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Not sometimes, not occasionally, but inevitably, because we have made our emotional state dependent on factors beyond our control. Going back to our job example, your preparation depends on you. Your attitude during the interview depends on you. Your effort and sincerity depend on you. But whether you get the job depends on countless factors beyond your control. Other candidates, budget constraints, internal politics, timing, the interviewer's personal preferences, economic conditions, company strategy changes. The list is endless. When you expect to get the job, you are essentially expecting all these uncontrollable factors to align in your favor. You are making your happiness dependent on variables you cannot influence. This is not just irrational. It's a recipe for suffering. Now, you might be thinking, but if I don't expect to get the job, won't I be less motivated to prepare? Won't I perform worse? This is one of the most common misunderstandings about Stoic philosophy. The Stoics are not advocating for lowered expectations or reduced effort. They are advocating for something far more sophisticated. They want you to give your absolute best effort while remaining completely detached from the outcome. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire and faced disappointments that could affect millions of lives, expressed this beautifully when he wrote about performing our duties with what he called a reserved clause. We act with full commitment and effort, but we always mentally add fate permitting to our expectations. So you prepare for the job interview as if getting the job is the most important thing in the world, but you approach the outcome as if it doesn't matter at all. This isn't contradiction, this is liberation. You are free to give your best effort because you are not burdened by the anxiety of needing a specific outcome. You are free to be yourself because you are not trying to manipulate results beyond your control. Let's explore this with another example, one that hits closer to home for many people: relationships. How many times have you been disappointed by someone you care about? A friend who didn't call when they said they would, a partner who didn't remember an important date, a family member who didn't show up when you needed them. In each case, the disappointment comes from the same source. You had an expectation about how that person should behave, and they didn't meet it. But here's the crucial question. Where did that expectation come from? Did that person sign a contract guaranteeing they would behave according to your expectations? Did they even know about your expectations? Most of the time, our expectations of others are completely one-sided. We decide how someone should act, we invest emotionally in that decision, and then we suffer when they act differently. We are essentially setting up a scenario where our emotional well-being depends on other people behaving according to rules they never agreed to follow. The Stoic approach is radically different. Instead of expecting people to behave in certain ways, we accept them as they are. This doesn't mean we lower our standards or accept mistreatment. It means we base our expectations on reality, rather than on our wishes. If your friend has a history of being unreliable, expecting them to suddenly become reliable is setting yourself up for disappointment. If your partner has never been good at remembering dates, expecting them to change without any discussion or agreement is unfair to both of you. If your family member has always been unavailable during crises, expecting them to be there this time is ignoring the evidence of their character. This might sound harsh, but it's actually compassionate. When we accept people as they are, we stop trying to force them into molds they don't fit. We stop being disappointed by their authentic behavior, and we can make informed decisions about how to interact with them. Does this mean we should never try to influence others or ask for what we need? Of course not. But there's a world of difference between making a request and having an expectation. When you make a request, you are expressing a preference while acknowledging that the other person has the right to say no. When you have an expectation, you are setting up a situation where anything other than compliance will cause you to suffer. Let's go deeper into this distinction between preference and expectation, because this is where the real power of Stoic philosophy lies. A preference is something you would like to happen, but you can be equally content if it doesn't happen. An expectation is something you believe should happen, and you will be upset if it doesn't. The difference is subtle but life-changing. When you prefer an outcome, you maintain your emotional equilibrium regardless of what happens. When you expect an outcome, you make your emotional state hostage to circumstances beyond your control. Consider the weather. You might prefer it to be sunny for your outdoor event, but you don't expect the weather to conform to your preferences. You check the forecast, you prepare for different scenarios, and you adapt as needed. You don't take rain personally or feel betrayed by clouds. This is the attitude the Stoics want you to apply to every area of your life. But let's be honest about something. Developing this attitude is not easy, especially when it comes to things we care deeply about. It's relatively simple to be philosophical about weather, but what about your children's success, your health, your financial security, your career advancement? This is where the Stoics offer us something profound. They don't ask us to care less. They ask us to care differently. They want us to care about what we can control and be indifferent to what we cannot control. This shift in focus is not just emotionally liberating, it's also practically more effective. When you focus on what you can control, you stop wasting energy on what you cannot control. When you stop expecting specific outcomes, you can put all your effort into the process. When you stop being attached to results, you become more creative, more flexible, more resilient. Let's apply this to parenting. which is perhaps one of the most challenging areas to maintain Stoic principles. Every parent wants their children to be happy, successful, healthy, and good. These are natural and beautiful desires. But when these desires become expectations, they become sources of endless anxiety and disappointment. You cannot control whether your child becomes a doctor, but you can control the values you teach them. You cannot control whether they make the team, but you can control the support and encouragement you provide. You cannot control their choices as adults, but you can control the foundation you help them build. The Stoic parent gives their absolute best effort in raising their child while accepting that the child is a separate human being with their own path to walk. They prepare their child for the world without expecting the world to conform to their child's needs. They love unconditionally while accepting that love doesn't guarantee any particular outcome. This approach actually makes you a better parent, not a more detached one. When you're not anxiously trying to control outcomes, you can focus on being present. When you're not devastated by every setback, you can model resilience. When you're not attached to specific achievements, you can celebrate your child's authentic self. Consider a specific scenario. Your teenager comes home with a report card full of C's when you expected A's and B's. The conventional parental response might involve disappointment, lectures about potential, comparisons to other students, or anxiety about college prospects. All of these responses are based on expectations about how your child should perform. The Stoic parent sees this differently. They recognize that grades are the result of multiple factors, some within the child's control and some not. They focus on what can be influenced: study habits, time management, asking for help when needed, understanding where the child is struggling. They don't waste energy being disappointed by the reality of where their child currently stands academically. This doesn't mean they don't care about their child's education or have no standards. It means they work with the reality of their child's current capabilities and circumstances, rather than against an imagined version of what those capabilities should be. They provide support and guidance without the emotional charge of violated expectations. The result is often better outcomes, not worse ones. When a child doesn't have to manage their parents' disappointment on top of their own academic challenges, they often perform better. When they feel accepted for who they are rather than criticized for who they're not, they're more likely to be open to guidance and support. But let's extend this principle beyond immediate family to the broader realm of human relationships. Think about your friendships, your romantic relationships, your professional relationships. How many conflicts and disappointments in these areas stem from unspoken expectations that the other person had no knowledge of or agreement to? You expect your friend to remember your birthday, but you never told them how important birthdays are to you. You expect your partner to know you need comfort when you're stressed, but you never communicated your preferred way of receiving support. You expect your colleague to respond to emails within an hour, but you never discussed response time expectations. In each case, you've created a standard in your mind, and then suffered when reality doesn't match that standard. But where did these standards come from? Often, they come from your own preferences, your past experiences, your cultural background, or simply your assumptions about how things should work. The Stoic approach is to recognize that other people operate according to their own standards, their own understanding, their own priorities. They are not mind readers, and they did not sign up to live according to your unspoken rules. When you accept this basic reality of human nature, many sources of disappointment simply evaporate. This doesn't mean you never communicate your preferences or needs. In fact, it often means communicating them more clearly and directly, precisely because you're not expecting the other person to somehow divine them. You make requests rather than nursing expectations. You express preferences rather than issuing demands. But even when you do communicate clearly, you hold the outcome lightly. You recognize that the other person has their own valid reasons for their choices, their own circumstances and constraints, their own way of prioritizing different values. Their response to your requests reflects their situation, not necessarily their feelings about you. Let's take a deeper dive into romantic relationships, where expectations and disappointments seem to multiply exponentially. People enter romantic relationships with elaborate scripts about how love should unfold, how partners should behave, what the relationship should provide emotionally and practically. These scripts often remain largely unconscious and uncommunicated. You expect your partner to anticipate your needs, to share your values completely, to change in ways that make them more compatible with you, to provide emotional states that you find difficult to create for yourself. When they inevitably fail to meet these expectations, disappointment and conflict follow. Consider the common expectation that love should be effortless, that if someone truly loves you, the relationship will be easy and natural. This expectation sets up almost every relationship for disappointment, because all human relationships require effort, compromise, communication, and ongoing negotiation of differences. When you expect effortlessness and encounter the normal difficulties of human connection, you interpret these difficulties as signs that something is wrong with the relationship or that your partner doesn't love you enough. But these difficulties are simply the reality of two different human beings trying to build a life together. The Stoic approach to romantic relationships is revolutionary. Accept your partner exactly as they are today, while being the best partner you can be today. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or abandoning all hopes for growth and change. It means distinguishing between your partner's core characteristics and your fantasies about who they might become. If your partner is naturally introverted, expecting them to become social butterflies is setting yourself up for disappointment. If they express love through actions rather than words, expecting them to become verbally expressive without clear communication and mutual agreement is unfair. If they have different financial priorities than you do, expecting them to automatically adopt your values is unrealistic. This acceptance actually creates more space for authentic growth and change. When people feel accepted for who they are, they often become more open to feedback and more willing to consider different ways of being. When they don't feel pressured to change, they may naturally evolve in positive directions. But even if they don't change at all, you're not disappointed because you weren't expecting change. You chose to be in relationship with this person as they are, not as you hoped they might become. Your love is based on reality, not on potential. This principle extends to every aspect of relationships. Instead of expecting your partner to make you happy, you take responsibility for your own emotional state while appreciating whatever joy they bring to your life. Instead of expecting them to complete you, you work on becoming whole yourself while enjoying the companionship they provide. Instead of expecting them to meet all your needs, you develop a diverse support network and appreciate the specific ways your partner does contribute to your life. Instead of expecting the relationship to eliminate all your problems, you view it as one positive element in a complex life that will always include challenges. This shift in perspective transforms the entire experience of being in relationship. Instead of constantly monitoring whether your partner is meeting your expectations, you can focus on appreciation and connection. Instead of feeling disappointed when they act according to their nature, you can respond with understanding and acceptance. But what about situations where your partner's behavior is genuinely problematic? What about infidelity, addiction, abuse, or other serious issues? The Stoic principle of acceptance doesn't mean tolerating behavior that's harmful to you or your family. Here's the crucial distinction. Accepting someone as they are doesn't mean accepting all possible behaviors from them. It means seeing their actions clearly, without the distortion of expectations, and making wise decisions based on that clear sight. If your partner has a pattern of infidelity, accepting this pattern means acknowledging that this is who they are right now, not expecting them to change without clear evidence of that change, and making decisions about the relationship based on this reality, rather than on hopes or promises. If your partner struggles with addiction, accepting this struggle means understanding that addiction is a complex condition that doesn't respond to expectations or demands, and making decisions about your own safety and well-being based on their actual behavior rather than their stated intentions. This clear-eyed acceptance often leads to better decisions than hope-based expectations. When you see clearly what is, you can make choices based on reality rather than on what you wish were true. You can protect yourself appropriately, seek help effectively, and maintain your own emotional stability regardless of your partner's choices. The same principle applies to friendships. We often have unconscious expectations about what friendship should look like, how often friends should contact each other, what kind of support they should provide, how they should handle disagreements or conflicts. But friendships, like all relationships, work best when they're based on acceptance of who each person actually is, rather than expectations about who they should be. Your friend who is terrible at remembering to call might be wonderful at showing up during crises. Your friend who can't provide emotional support might be great at making you laugh when you need it. When you accept the specific gifts each friend brings rather than expecting them all to be everything to you, you can appreciate what they do offer without being disappointed by what they don't offer. You can build a diverse network of friendships where different people contribute different things, rather than expecting any one person to meet all your friendship needs. This acceptance also makes you a better friend. When you're not constantly monitoring whether others are meeting your expectations, you can focus on being the kind of friend you want to be. When you're not disappointed by others' limitations, you can appreciate their strengths. When you're not trying to change people, you can support them in being their authentic selves. Now let's turn our attention to professional relationships and career disappointments, which are sources of tremendous suffering for many people. The workplace is often a breeding ground for expectations and disappointments because it involves complex hierarchies, competing interests, unclear communication, and high stakes. You work hard on a project and expect recognition, but your contribution gets overlooked. You apply for a promotion and expect to be rewarded for your years of service, but the position goes to someone else. You expect your boss to be fair and rational, but they make decisions based on politics and favoritism. Each of these disappointments stems from expectations about how the workplace should operate. But workplaces are human systems, and human systems are messy, imperfect, and often irrational. When you expect them to operate according to pure merit, fairness, and logic, you set yourself up for constant disappointment. The Stoic approach to career challenges is to focus entirely on what you can control: the quality of your work, your professionalism, your skills development, your relationships with colleagues, your attitude and work ethic. You give your best effort not because you expect specific rewards, but because excellence is its own reward and because it aligns with your values. When recognition comes, you appreciate it without becoming attached to it. When it doesn't come, you're not devastated, because your self-worth and job satisfaction aren't dependent on external validation. You work well because that's who you choose to be, not because you expect it to guarantee particular outcomes. This doesn't mean being passive about career advancement or accepting unfair treatment. It means approaching these challenges from a place of clarity rather than emotional reactivity. When you're not consumed by disappointment about how things should be, you can focus on strategic action about how to work effectively within the system as it actually is. You might decide to have conversations about career development, seek opportunities elsewhere, or document unfair treatment. But you take these actions based on clear assessment of your situation and goals, not as emotional reactions to violated expectations. This approach often leads to better career outcomes because you're not wasting energy on resentment and disappointment. You're not paralyzed by the gap between how things should be and how they are. You can adapt quickly to changing circumstances because you're not invested in maintaining illusions about how the workplace operates. Let's examine a specific workplace scenario in detail. Imagine you've been working at a company for 3 years, consistently receiving good performance reviews and taking on increasing responsibilities. A management position opens up, and you apply, feeling confident that your track record makes you the obvious choice. Instead, the position goes to someone who was hired 6 months ago but has a relationship with the hiring manager. You feel betrayed, overlooked, and angry. Your disappointment is so intense it affects your work performance and your relationships with colleagues. From a Stoic perspective, this disappointment reveals several problematic expectations. You expected merit to be the primary factor in hiring decisions, ignoring the reality that relationships, politics, and other factors often play significant roles. You expected your past performance to guarantee future opportunities, forgetting that each hiring decision involves unique circumstances and criteria. You expected the workplace to operate according to your values of fairness and logic, overlooking the fact that organizations are complex human systems influenced by many factors beyond pure merit. You made your emotional well-being dependent on getting the promotion, essentially giving other people control over your happiness. The Stoic response would be different. You would do your best work and apply for opportunities because that aligns with your values, not because you expect specific outcomes. You would understand that hiring decisions involve factors beyond your control, and base your career strategy on this reality rather than on how you think things should work. When you don't get the promotion, you're not devastated because your self-worth isn't tied to external validation. You can assess the situation clearly. Is this an organization where you're likely to advance? Are there steps you can take to improve your position? Would you be happier elsewhere? You make these assessments from a place of emotional stability rather than reactive disappointment. You can have conversations with management about your career development without the charge of violated expectations. You can explore other opportunities without the baggage of feeling wronged. This approach doesn't guarantee you'll get the next promotion, but it does guarantee you'll handle whatever happens with dignity and wisdom. You'll make better decisions because they're based on clear thinking rather than emotional reactivity. You'll be more attractive to employers because you're not carrying resentment and disappointment. Now let's explore how these principles apply to one of the most challenging and important areas of human experience: health and aging. Our culture promotes many expectations about health that set us up for disappointment and suffering. We expect our bodies to remain young and strong indefinitely if we just follow the right diet and exercise program. We expect medical treatments to cure all ailments without side effects. We expect to maintain our current capabilities throughout our lives. We expect that if we take care of ourselves, we won't get sick. These expectations ignore the fundamental reality of human existence. We are biological organisms subject to illness, injury, aging, and death. Our bodies are incredibly complex systems that can malfunction in countless ways, many of which are beyond our control. When you expect your body to never fail you, every ache, pain, and sign of aging becomes a disappointment. When you expect perfect health as a reward for healthy living, any illness feels like a betrayal. When you expect medical treatments to provide perfect solutions, any limitation or side effect becomes a source of frustration. The Stoic approach to health is both more realistic and more peaceful. You do everything within your control to maintain your health. Eat well, exercise regularly, get adequate sleep, manage stress, seek appropriate medical care. But you do these things because they align with your values and because they often make you feel better, not because you expect them to guarantee particular outcomes. You accept that illness, injury, and aging are part of the human condition. You don't take them personally or feel betrayed by your body when they occur. You adapt to changing circumstances and capabilities without wasting energy on resentment about how things used to be or disappointment about how things should be. This acceptance doesn't mean being passive about health problems or failing to seek treatment. It means approaching health challenges from a place of acceptance and wisdom rather than disappointment and resistance. When you're not fighting against the reality of your condition, you can focus your energy on responding to it effectively. Consider someone who receives a diagnosis of a chronic illness. The conventional response often involves a period of denial, anger, and depression about how unfair the situation is. The person might feel betrayed by their body, angry at the universe, or disappointed that their healthy lifestyle didn't protect them. The Stoic response is different. While there might be an initial period of adjustment, the focus quickly shifts to acceptance and adaptation. The person acknowledges that illness is part of the human condition, that their body is subject to the same biological realities as everyone else's, and that their value as a person isn't diminished by their health condition. This acceptance allows them to focus on what they can control, following treatment recommendations, adapting their lifestyle as needed, maintaining relationships and activities that are still possible, finding new sources of meaning and satisfaction within their constraints. They don't waste energy being angry about having the illness or disappointed that treatments aren't perfect. They work with their medical team to manage their condition as effectively as possible while accepting that some limitations may be permanent. This approach often leads to better outcomes, both medically and emotionally. When you're not fighting against reality, you can focus on working with reality. When you're not consumed by disappointment about your condition, you can put your energy into managing it effectively. The same principles apply to aging, which is perhaps the most universal source of health-related disappointment. Our culture's obsession with youth creates unrealistic expectations about what aging should look like and what we should be able to accomplish at different life stages. When you expect to maintain the same energy, appearance, and capabilities throughout your life, every sign of aging becomes a disappointment. When you expect that good health habits will prevent aging, You're setting yourself up for daily disappointments as your body changes despite your best efforts. The Stoic approach to aging is to accept it as a natural process that every human being experiences. You take care of yourself to age as well as possible, but you don't expect to stop or reverse the aging process. You adapt to changing capabilities while appreciating what you can still do. You find new sources of meaning and satisfaction that align with your current life stage rather than clinging to activities and identities that may no longer serve you. You appreciate the wisdom and perspective that come with age, rather than focusing only on what you've lost. This acceptance transforms the experience of aging from a series of disappointments into a natural progression that can include beauty, wisdom, and satisfaction. When you're not constantly fighting against the reality of aging, you can embrace the unique gifts of each life stage. Let's now examine how Stoic principles apply to financial disappointments, which are sources of significant stress and suffering for many people. Our culture promotes many expectations about money that lead to disappointment and anxiety. We expect hard work to be reliably rewarded with financial success. We expect investments to grow predictably. We expect the economy to behave rationally. We expect that if we follow financial advice and make good decisions, we'll achieve financial security. These expectations ignore the reality that financial outcomes depend on countless factors beyond individual control: economic cycles, market volatility, technological disruption, political changes, natural disasters, global events, and the decisions of millions of other people. When you expect your financial life to unfold according to your plans, every market downturn, job loss, or unexpected expense becomes a source of disappointment and anxiety. When you expect effort to guarantee specific financial outcomes, any setback feels like a personal failure. The Stoic approach to money is to focus on what you can control, while accepting that you cannot control outcomes. You can control your spending, your saving rate, your work ethic, your financial education, and your investment decisions. You cannot control market performance, economic conditions, employment stability, or unexpected expenses. You make wise financial decisions not because you expect them to guarantee specific outcomes, but because they align with your values and because they often lead to better results than unwise decisions. You save and invest not because you expect particular returns, but because these habits usually improve your financial situation over time. When financial setbacks occur, you're not devastated because you weren't expecting guarantees. You adapt to the new situation and make the best decisions you can with the resources available to you. You don't waste energy being disappointed about how things should have worked out differently. This approach actually tends to lead to better financial outcomes because you make decisions based on realistic assessments rather than wishful thinking. You're not paralyzed by anxiety about outcomes beyond your control. You can adapt quickly to changing circumstances because you're not invested in maintaining illusions about how money should work. Consider someone who loses their job during an economic recession. The conventional response might involve intense disappointment about the unfairness of the situation, anxiety about the future, and anger at the company or economic system. These emotions, while understandable, don't improve the situation and often make it harder to respond effectively. The Stoic response is different. While there might be initial disappointment, the focus quickly shifts to acceptance and action. The person acknowledges that job loss is a common part of working life, especially during economic downturns, and that their worth as a person isn't determined by their employment status. They focus on what they can control: updating their resume, networking, developing new skills, managing their expenses, and taking care of their health during a stressful time. They don't waste energy being angry about economic forces beyond their control or disappointed that their previous job security wasn't permanent. This approach often leads to better outcomes. When you're not consumed by disappointment and anxiety, you can focus your energy on practical actions. When you're not taking job loss personally, you can present yourself more positively to potential employers. When you're adaptable, rather than rigid in your expectations, you might discover opportunities you wouldn't have considered before. The same principles apply to investment disappointments. When the stock market crashes and your portfolio loses value, you can either be devastated by the gap between your expectations and reality, or you can accept that market volatility is a normal part of investing. If you expected steady gains and never considered the possibility of significant losses, the crash becomes a source of intense disappointment and panic. You might make emotional decisions like selling at the bottom or abandoning your investment strategy entirely. If you accepted from the beginning that markets are volatile and that losses are possible, the crash is disappointing but not devastating. You can stick to your long-term strategy or make rational adjustments based on your changing circumstances and goals. This doesn't mean being passive about financial planning or accepting preventable losses. It means making decisions based on realistic expectations about how financial markets actually behave rather than on wishful thinking about how they should behave. Now let's explore one of the most emotionally charged areas where expectations lead to disappointment: our relationships with our children and our roles as parents. Parenting is perhaps the area where well-meaning expectations cause the most suffering for both parents and children. We expect our children to be healthy, intelligent, well-behaved, successful, and happy. We expect them to appreciate our sacrifices and follow our guidance. We expect that if we're good parents, our children will turn out well. We expect them to fulfill our dreams or at least avoid our mistakes. These expectations, while understandable, ignore the reality that children are separate human beings with their own personalities, capabilities, challenges, and life paths. They are influenced by countless factors beyond parental control: genetics, peer groups, teachers, cultural influences, random events, and their own choices. When you expect your child to behave in certain ways or achieve certain outcomes, every instance of different behavior or different outcomes becomes a source of disappointment and anxiety. When you expect parenting to be a controllable process with predictable results, every challenge feels like a personal failure. The Stoic approach to parenting is to give your absolute best effort while accepting that you cannot control outcomes. You provide love, guidance, structure, and opportunities because these align with your values as a parent, not because you expect them to guarantee specific results. You accept that your child is a unique individual who will make their own choices and face their own challenges. You support them through difficulties without taking responsibility for problems you didn't cause. You celebrate their successes without taking credit for achievements that required their own effort and natural abilities. This approach actually makes you a more effective parent because you're not constantly anxious about outcomes beyond your control. You can be present with your child as they are, rather than disappointed that they're not someone else. You can provide guidance without the pressure of expectations that might push them away. Consider a parent whose teenager is struggling with depression. The conventional response might involve disappointment that their child isn't happy, anxiety about their future, and self-blame about what they might have done wrong. These emotions, while natural, don't help the child and often make the situation more difficult. The Stoic parent accepts that depression is a real medical condition that affects many young people, often for reasons that have nothing to do with parenting quality. They focus on what they can control: providing support, seeking professional help, maintaining a stable home environment, and taking care of their own emotional health so they can be present for their child. They don't waste energy being disappointed that their child is struggling or anxious about outcomes they cannot control. They work with mental health professionals and support their child's treatment without expecting immediate or complete recovery. This approach is more helpful to the child because they don't have to manage their parents' disappointment on top of their own mental health challenges. They feel supported rather than like a source of parental failure. The parent can provide more effective support because they're not emotionally destabilized by the situation. The same principles apply to academic performance, social challenges, career choices, and all the other areas where parents often have expectations that lead to disappointment. When you focus on providing support and guidance rather than controlling outcomes, you become a more effective parent and experience much less suffering. This doesn't mean having no standards or being uninvolved in your child's life. It means distinguishing between your responsibilities as a parent and outcomes that depend on your child's choices, natural abilities, and circumstances beyond anyone's control. You can teach values without expecting your child to adopt them exactly as you hold them. You can provide educational opportunities without expecting specific academic achievements. You can model healthy behavior without expecting your child to never make mistakes or struggle with challenges. When you hold your role as a parent this way, you can enjoy your relationship with your child much more fully. Instead of constantly monitoring whether they're meeting your expectations, you can appreciate who they actually are. Instead of being disappointed by their struggles, you can support them through difficulties with compassion and wisdom. Let's now examine how expectations and disappointments play out in our social and political lives. Many people experience chronic disappointment and anxiety about social conditions, political developments, and cultural changes that are largely beyond their individual control. We expect political leaders to be honest and competent. We expect people to behave rationally and consider the common good. We expect social progress to be steady and predictable. We expect justice to prevail and problems to be solved through reasonable discussion and compromise. These expectations, while they reflect admirable values, often lead to constant disappointment and despair when reality doesn't match our ideals. Political leaders lie and make poor decisions. People act irrationally and pursue narrow self-interest. Progress is uneven and often accompanied by backlash. Justice is imperfect, and problems often persist despite reasonable efforts to solve them. When you expect society to operate according to your values and vision, every news cycle brings fresh disappointments. When you expect political and social systems to be rational and fair, you're constantly frustrated by their messiness and imperfection. The Stoic approach to social and political engagement is to focus on your own sphere of influence, while accepting that you cannot control large-scale outcomes. You vote, volunteer, donate, and advocate for causes you believe in because these actions align with your values, not because you expect them to guarantee specific results. You understand that social change is slow, complex, and often involves setbacks. You accept that many people will hold different values and priorities than you do, and that democracy requires negotiating among these differences rather than imposing uniform agreement. This doesn't mean being passive about social issues or accepting injustice. It means engaging with these issues from a place of realistic expectations rather than disappointment-generating fantasies about how quickly and easily change should occur. When you're not constantly disappointed by predictable political and social realities, you can engage more effectively. You can persist through setbacks because you weren't expecting easy victories. You can work with people you disagree with because you're not expecting them to share all your values. You can maintain hope because it's not dependent on short-term outcomes. Consider someone who cares deeply about environmental issues. They might expect that presenting scientific evidence will convince everyone to support environmental protection. When this doesn't happen, they become disappointed and angry at people who don't share their environmental values. The Stoic environmentalist accepts that people have different priorities, different ways of processing information, and different relationships with environmental issues. They work to protect the environment because they value the natural world, not because they expect their efforts to immediately change everyone's minds. They focus on actions within their control, reducing their own environmental impact, supporting environmental organizations, voting for pro-environment candidates, and having respectful conversations with people who might be open to different perspectives. They don't waste energy being disappointed that environmental destruction continues or angry at people who don't share their values. They persist in their efforts because the work itself is meaningful, not because they expect it to solve all environmental problems quickly. This approach is more sustainable emotionally and often more effective practically. When you're not consumed by disappointment about others' choices, you can focus on making good choices yourself. When you're not angry at people for not sharing your values, you might be more persuasive when opportunities for influence arise. Now, let's turn our attention to a particularly modern source of disappointment: social media and digital communication. These technologies have created new opportunities for expectations and disappointments that previous generations never had to navigate. We expect our posts to receive certain amounts of engagement. We expect people to respond to messages promptly. We expect online interactions to be as satisfying as in-person relationships. We expect social media to provide genuine connection and community. These expectations ignore the realities of how digital communication actually works. People have different comfort levels with online sharing, different priorities for their time and attention, and different ways of engaging with technology. Social media algorithms determine visibility more than content quality. Online interactions lack many of the nuances that make in-person communication satisfying. When you expect social media to operate like real-life social interaction, you're constantly disappointed by its limitations. When you expect your online presence to receive consistent validation, every post that doesn't perform well becomes a source of disappointment. The Stoic approach to digital communication is to use these tools for what they do well while accepting their limitations. You share content because you enjoy creating it or because you want to communicate something, not because you expect specific responses. You engage with others online as a supplement to, not a replacement for, in-person relationships. You understand that online engagement is influenced by many factors beyond the quality of your content. Timing, algorithms, people's mood and availability, and the overwhelming amount of content competing for attention. You don't take lack of engagement personally or feel disappointed when your expectations about online interaction aren't met. This approach allows you to use social media more enjoyably and effectively. When you're not constantly monitoring engagement or feeling disappointed by others' online behavior, you can focus on creating content you're proud of and having genuine interactions when they occur. The same principles apply to email, text messaging, and other forms of digital communication. When you expect immediate responses and feel disappointed when they don't come, you're making your emotional state dependent on other people's communication habits and schedules. When you send messages as a way of reaching out without expecting particular timing or content in responses, you eliminate a major source of modern disappointment. You can communicate your needs clearly, while accepting that others will respond according to their own priorities and constraints. Let's explore another area where expectations frequently lead to disappointment: our relationship with time and productivity. Modern culture promotes many expectations about how we should use our time and what we should be able to accomplish. We expect to be productive all the time. We expect that good time management will allow us to accomplish everything we want to do. We expect that technology will make our lives more efficient and give us more leisure time. We expect to maintain high energy and focus throughout long work days. These expectations ignore basic realities about human nature and the limitations of time. We have natural rhythms of energy and attention that vary throughout the day and across different life phases. We can only do one thing at a time, and every choice to do something involves choosing not to do something else. Technology often creates new demands rather than simply making existing tasks easier. When you expect to be consistently productive and feel disappointed during periods of lower energy or focus, you're fighting against your natural rhythms rather than working with them. When you expect to accomplish everything on your to-do list and feel disappointed when you don't, you're probably creating unrealistic lists that ignore the actual constraints of time and energy. The Stoic approach to time and productivity is to work with your natural capabilities and constraints rather than against them. You do your best work during your peak energy periods and accept that there will be times when your productivity is lower. You prioritize your most important tasks while accepting that you can't do everything. You use time management tools and techniques because they often help you work more effectively, not because you expect them to eliminate all time constraints or productivity challenges. You accept that some days will be more productive than others and that this variation is normal rather than a sign of personal failure. This approach often leads to better productivity outcomes because you're working with reality rather than against it. When you're not disappointed by natural productivity fluctuations, you can respond to them more skillfully. When you accept your limitations, you can make better choices about how to use your limited time and energy. Consider someone who expects to maintain the same level of productivity throughout a demanding work week. When their energy flags on Thursday afternoon, they become disappointed and frustrated with themselves. They might push through fatigue, make poor decisions due to tiredness, or feel like failures for not maintaining consistent output. The Stoic approach recognizes that energy naturally fluctuates and plans accordingly. This person might schedule their most demanding tasks for times when they typically have the most energy and use lower energy periods for routine tasks or planning activities. When their energy is low, they're not disappointed because they expected this to happen sometimes. They can rest without guilt, adjust their expectations for the day, or find ways to work that align with their current energy level. This approach is more sustainable and often more productive over the long term. When you work with your natural rhythms rather than against them, you can maintain higher average productivity without burning out. Now let's examine how Stoic principles apply to one of the most challenging areas of human experience, dealing with criticism and social judgment. Most people have expectations about how others should treat them and respond to them that lead to frequent disappointments. We expect people to be fair in their judgments of us. We expect others to appreciate our efforts and intentions. We expect that if we treat people well, they will treat us well in return. We expect criticism to be constructive and delivered kindly. These expectations ignore basic realities about human nature and social interaction. People judge others based on limited information, their own biases and experiences, and their current emotional state. They often focus more on how your actions affect them than on your intentions. Fair treatment is not guaranteed, and good treatment of others doesn't always result in reciprocal behavior. When you expect others to judge you fairly and feel disappointed when they don't, you're making your emotional state dependent on other people's perceptions and opinions. When you expect appreciation for your efforts and feel hurt when it doesn't come, you're expecting others to prioritize your needs over their own concerns. The Stoic approach to criticism and social judgment is to focus on your own character and choices while accepting that you cannot control others' opinions or responses. You act according to your values because that's who you choose to be, not because you expect specific reactions from others. You consider criticism for any useful information it might contain, while not taking it as the final word on your worth or capabilities. You appreciate positive feedback when it comes, while not depending on it for your self-esteem. You understand that other people's judgments reflect their perspective and priorities more than objective truth about you. This approach protects you from much suffering because you're not constantly disappointed by others' responses to you. You can act with integrity and kindness because these align with your values, not because you expect them to guarantee positive treatment from others. When criticism comes, you're not devastated because you weren't expecting universal approval. You can evaluate feedback objectively, rather than defensively. When appreciation comes, you can enjoy it without becoming dependent on it. Consider someone who gives a presentation at work and receives mixed feedback. Some colleagues praise their preparation and insights, while others criticize their delivery style and question some of their conclusions. The conventional response might involve disappointment that the presentation wasn't universally well received, hurt feelings about the criticism, and anxiety about how this might affect their professional reputation. They might dwell on the negative comments and dismiss the positive ones. The Stoic response is different. This person evaluates all feedback for useful information while not taking any of it as the definitive judgment of their worth or abilities. They appreciate the positive comments without becoming attached to praise. They consider the criticisms for ways to improve future presentations while not being devastated by current imperfections. They understand that any presentation will receive mixed reactions because people have different preferences, expertise levels, and priorities. They focus on what they can learn from the experience rather than being disappointed that it didn't meet their expectations for universal approval. This approach allows them to improve more effectively because they can process feedback objectively. They can maintain confidence in their abilities while remaining open to growth. They can give future presentations without being paralyzed by anxiety about others' judgments. Let's explore how these principles apply to one of the most fundamental areas of human experience, our relationship with our own thoughts and emotions. Many people have expectations about their inner life that lead to disappointment and self-criticism. We expect to be able to control our thoughts and feelings. We expect positive thinking to guarantee positive outcomes. We expect that if we're good people, we won't have negative or inappropriate thoughts. We expect our emotions to be rational and proportionate to circumstances. These expectations ignore basic realities about how the human mind works. Thoughts arise spontaneously and are influenced by factors beyond conscious control. Past experiences, current stress levels, brain chemistry, external stimuli, and unconscious processing. Emotions are often irrational and influenced by biological and psychological factors that have little to do with current circumstances. When you expect to control your thoughts and feel disappointed, when unwanted thoughts arise, you're fighting against the natural functioning of your mind. When you expect your emotions to always be appropriate and reasonable, you're setting yourself up for constant self-criticism. The Stoic approach to thoughts and emotions is to accept them as natural phenomena while taking responsibility for how you respond to them. You can't control what thoughts arise, but you can choose which thoughts to engage with and act upon. You can't control your initial emotional reactions, but you can influence how you handle those emotions over time. You observe your thoughts and emotions with curiosity rather than judgment. You understand that having a thought doesn't mean you have to believe it or act on it. You accept that emotions will arise without expecting them to always make sense or be pleasant. This approach reduces much internal suffering because you're not constantly fighting against your own mind. You can experience difficult thoughts and emotions without adding the extra layer of disappointment about having them. You can work with your mental patterns rather than against them. Consider someone who struggles with anxiety. They might expect that understanding the irrationality of their anxiety should make it go away. When anxious thoughts continue to arise, despite their rational understanding, they become disappointed and frustrated with themselves. The Stoic approach accepts that anxiety is a common human experience that doesn't disappear just because we understand it intellectually. This person works with their anxiety rather than against it, using coping strategies when needed, seeking professional help if appropriate, and not expecting perfection from their emotional life. They don't waste energy being disappointed that they still experience anxiety. They focus on responding to anxiety skillfully rather than trying to eliminate it entirely. They accept anxiety as part of their current experience while working gradually toward greater emotional balance. This approach is more effective because it's based on realistic expectations about mental health and emotional processing. When you're not fighting against natural mental phenomena, you can work with them more skillfully. Now let's examine how Stoic principles apply to our expectations about fairness and justice in daily life. Most people carry expectations about how fair life should be that lead to chronic disappointment and resentment. We expect merit to be rewarded and wrongdoing to be punished. We expect that if we work hard and follow the rules, we'll be treated fairly. We expect good things to happen to good people and bad things to happen to bad people. We expect systems and institutions to operate according to principles of justice and rationality. These expectations, while they reflect important values, ignore the complex realities of how the world actually operates. Merit is often not rewarded, and wrongdoing frequently goes unpunished. Hard work and rule following don't guarantee fair treatment. Good and bad things happen to people regardless of their moral character. Systems and institutions are human creations that reflect human limitations and biases. When you expect life to be fair and feel disappointed when it isn't, you're constantly fighting against reality rather than working skillfully within it. When you expect justice to automatically prevail, you're unprepared for the persistent work that creating more justice actually requires. The Stoic approach to fairness and justice is to work toward these ideals while accepting that they will never be perfectly realized. You act justly because that aligns with your values, not because you expect just behavior to guarantee just treatment in return. You work for systemic improvements while accepting that progress is slow and uneven. You understand that expecting perfect fairness from an imperfect world is a recipe for constant disappointment. You focus on what you can control, your own behavior and choices, while accepting that you cannot control whether others treat you fairly or whether systems operate justly. This doesn't mean being passive about injustice or accepting mistreatment without response. It means approaching these challenges from a place of realistic expectations rather than disappointed idealism. When you're not constantly surprised by unfairness, you can respond to it more effectively. Consider someone who discovers they're being paid less than colleagues for the same work. The conventional response might involve intense disappointment about the unfairness of the situation, anger at the employer, and despair about workplace inequality. The Stoic response acknowledges that pay inequity is unfortunately common and doesn't take it as a personal attack or cosmic injustice. This person focuses on what they can control, documenting the disparity, researching appropriate salary ranges, and having professional conversations about compensation. They might decide to advocate for a raise, seek employment elsewhere, or consult with employment attorneys, but they make these decisions from a place of clear thinking rather than emotional reactivity. They're not paralyzed by disappointment about unfairness because they expected fairness to be imperfectly distributed. This approach often leads to better outcomes because decisions are based on strategic thinking rather than emotional reactions. When you're not consumed by disappointment about unfairness, you can focus your energy on effective responses to unfair situations. Let's explore how these principles apply to our expectations about personal growth and self-improvement. Many people approach personal development with expectations that lead to disappointment and discouragement. We expect change to happen quickly and linearly. We expect that understanding a problem should automatically lead to solving it. We expect that wanting to change should be sufficient motivation to make change easy. We expect personal growth to be a smooth process without setbacks or plateaus. These expectations ignore basic realities about how human beings actually change. Change is typically slow, uneven, and involves frequent setbacks. Understanding problems intellectually is different from changing ingrained patterns of behavior. Wanting to change and being able to change involve different psychological processes. Personal growth is usually a messy process, with advances, retreats, and periods of apparent stagnation. When you expect change to be faster and easier than it actually is, every setback becomes a disappointment and every plateau feels like failure. When you expect understanding to automatically translate into behavioral change, you become frustrated with the gap between knowledge and action. The Stoic approach to personal growth is to commit to the process while accepting that progress will be uneven and gradual. You work on developing better habits and responses because this aligns with your values, not because you expect quick or dramatic results. You measure progress over long time periods rather than expecting daily improvement. You accept setbacks as normal parts of the change process rather than as evidence of failure. You focus on consistency in effort rather than perfection in outcomes. This approach is more sustainable and often more effective because you're working with realistic expectations rather than against them. When you're not constantly disappointed by the normal challenges of personal growth, you can persist through difficulties that might otherwise cause you to give up. Consider someone trying to develop better emotional regulation. They might expect that once they understand their emotional patterns, they should be able to control their reactions immediately. When they continue to have emotional outbursts despite their new understanding, they become disappointed and consider themselves failures. The Stoic approach accepts that emotional patterns developed over years or decades won't change overnight. This person celebrates small improvements while accepting that progress will be gradual. They don't expect perfection and aren't devastated by setbacks. They focus on building skills and awareness over time rather than expecting immediate transformation. They track progress over months rather than days and appreciate partial improvements rather than demanding complete change. This approach is more encouraging and more effective. When you're not fighting against the natural pace of human change, you can work with it more skillfully. When you're not disappointed by normal setbacks, you can learn from them and continue moving forward. Now let's examine how Stoic principles apply to our expectations about achieving our goals and dreams. Goal setting is often taught in ways that create unrealistic expectations and set people up for disappointment. We expect that setting clear goals will guarantee achieving them. We expect that hard work will always lead to desired outcomes. We expect that if we follow proven strategies, we'll get predictable results. We expect that achieving our goals will provide lasting satisfaction and happiness. These expectations ignore many realities about goal achievement. Goals involve factors beyond individual control: other people's decisions, economic conditions, timing, competition, and random events. Hard work is necessary but not sufficient for most significant achievements. Strategies that work for some people in some circumstances don't work for everyone in all circumstances. Goal achievement often provides temporary satisfaction followed by the emergence of new desires and challenges. When you expect goal setting and hard work to guarantee specific outcomes, every failure to achieve a goal becomes a major disappointment. When you expect achieving goals to provide lasting happiness, you're often disappointed by how quickly the satisfaction fades. The Stoic approach to goals is to focus entirely on the process while holding outcomes lightly. You set goals because they provide direction and motivation, not because you expect to achieve them exactly as planned. You work towards your goals because the work itself is meaningful, and because it often leads to positive outcomes, not because you expect specific guarantees. You measure success by the quality of your effort and the skills you develop, rather than only by external achievements. You adapt your goals as circumstances change rather than being rigidly attached to original plans. You find satisfaction in the pursuit itself rather than depending entirely on outcomes for fulfillment. This approach often leads to better outcomes because you're more flexible and resilient when facing obstacles. When you're not devastated by setbacks or changes in direction, you can adapt more quickly and effectively. When you're not entirely focused on specific outcomes, you might notice opportunities you would otherwise miss. Consider someone who sets a goal to start their own business within 2 years. They might expect that following business plan templates and working hard will guarantee success. When they encounter unexpected challenges, market changes, or competition, they become disappointed and consider giving up. The Stoic entrepreneur accepts that business success involves many factors beyond individual control. They work diligently on what they can influence: product development, marketing, customer service, and financial management. But they hold their specific timeline and outcome expectations lightly. When challenges arise, they're not devastated because they expected the entrepreneurial path to be uncertain and difficult. They adapt their strategies, timeline, or even their business model as needed. They measure progress by their growing skills and knowledge rather than only by external milestones. They might discover that their original business idea wasn't viable, but the skills they developed lead to a different opportunity they couldn't have anticipated. Because they weren't rigidly attached to their original plan, they can pivot effectively when circumstances change. This approach is more sustainable and often more successful. When you're not rigidly attached to specific outcomes, you can respond more creatively to changing circumstances. When you're not devastated by setbacks, you can persist through the inevitable challenges of pursuing ambitious goals. Let's explore how these principles apply to our expectations about learning and skill development. Many people approach learning with expectations that lead to frustration and discouragement. We expect learning to be consistently enjoyable and engaging. We expect that once we understand a concept, we should be able to apply it immediately. We expect progress to be steady and measurable. We expect that enough effort will allow us to master any skill we choose to pursue. These expectations ignore basic realities about how learning actually works. Learning often involves confusion, frustration, and periods where progress isn't apparent. Understanding concepts intellectually is different from being able to apply them skillfully. Progress in complex skills is typically uneven, with plateaus and sudden advances. Natural aptitude, previous experience, and other factors influence how quickly and easily people can develop different skills. When you expect learning to always be enjoyable and become frustrated when it's difficult, you're fighting against the natural learning process. When you expect immediate application of new concepts and feel disappointed when you can't implement them right away, you're likely to give up too quickly. The Stoic approach to learning is to embrace the process, including its challenging aspects, while not being attached to specific timelines or levels of achievement. You learn because knowledge and skills are intrinsically valuable, and because they often lead to positive outcomes, not because you expect learning to always be easy or immediately applicable. You accept that confusion and frustration are normal parts of learning complex material. You measure progress over long periods rather than expecting constant advancement. You appreciate partial understanding and developing skills rather than expecting immediate mastery. This approach makes learning more enjoyable and more effective. When you're not fighting against the natural challenges of learning, you can work with them more skillfully. When you're not disappointed by normal learning plateaus, you can persist through them to reach new levels of understanding. Consider someone learning a musical instrument. They might expect that regular practice will lead to steady, measurable progress. When they hit plateaus or struggle with particular techniques, they become frustrated and consider quitting. The Stoic musician accepts that skill development in music involves periods of rapid progress alternating with plateaus and struggles. They practice regularly because they enjoy the process, and because it generally leads to improvement over time, not because they expect linear progress. When they struggle with difficult pieces or techniques, they're not discouraged because they expected learning music to be challenging. They appreciate small improvements and enjoy the process of working on their craft, rather than being focused entirely on achieving specific performance levels. This approach is more sustainable and often leads to better musical development. When you're not frustrated by normal learning challenges, you can work through them more effectively. When you enjoy the process itself, you're more likely to persist long enough to achieve significant skill levels. Now let's examine how Stoic principles apply to our expectations about receiving help and support from others. Many people have expectations about help that lead to disappointment and resentment. We expect that people will offer help when they see us struggling. We expect that if we help others, they will help us when we need it. We expect family members and close friends to prioritize our needs when we're in crisis. We expect that asking for help politely will result in receiving the assistance we need. These expectations ignore basic realities about human nature and social dynamics. People are often absorbed in their own challenges and may not notice when others are struggling. Helping behavior is influenced by many factors beyond gratitude: current stress levels, available resources, competing obligations, and personal capacity. Even close relationships have limits, and people may not be able to provide help even when they want to. When you expect help and support and feel disappointed when they don't materialize, you're making your emotional state dependent on other people's choices and capabilities. When you expect reciprocity in helping and feel resentful when it doesn't occur, you're turning generous acts into transactions with unspoken terms. The Stoic approach to giving and receiving help is to offer assistance because it aligns with your values while not expecting specific reciprocity. You ask for help when you need it while accepting that others may not be able or willing to provide it. You appreciate help when it comes while not depending on it for your sense of security or self-worth. You understand that everyone has limitations on their time, energy, and resources. You don't take lack of help personally or interpret it as a judgment on your worth. You develop your own resources and capabilities while appreciating the support that others can provide. This approach reduces much suffering because you're not constantly disappointed by others' limitations. You can ask for help without the emotional charge of expectation. You can offer help without keeping score or feeling resentful when others don't reciprocate in the ways you expected. Consider someone going through a difficult divorce who expects their friends and family to provide extensive emotional support. When some people are uncomfortable discussing relationship problems or don't have time for frequent check-ins, this person feels abandoned and disappointed. The Stoic approach accepts that people have different comfort levels with emotional support and different capacities for helping during crises. This person appreciates whatever support others can provide while not expecting anyone to be their primary source of emotional stability. They might seek professional counseling, join support groups, or develop other resources rather than depending entirely on their social network. They appreciate friends who can provide a listening ear while not being disappointed in those who show support in different ways or have limited availability. This approach maintains better relationships because it doesn't burden others with expectations they may not be able to meet. It also provides more stable support because it doesn't depend entirely on other people's availability and capacity. Let's explore how these principles apply to our expectations about technology and modern conveniences. We often develop expectations about how technology should work that lead to frequent frustrations and disappointments. We expect technology to work perfectly and quickly. We expect that newer versions of devices and software will always be improvements. We expect that technology will solve problems without creating new ones. We expect that digital solutions will be intuitive and immediately useful. These expectations ignore realities about how technology actually functions. Technology is created by imperfect humans and is subject to bugs, glitches, and design flaws. Newer versions sometimes have problems that older versions didn't have. Technology often solves some problems while creating others. Digital tools that seem simple usually require learning curves and adaptation periods. When you expect technology to work flawlessly and feel frustrated when it doesn't, you're setting yourself up for constant irritation. When you expect each upgrade to be an improvement and feel disappointed when new versions have problems, you're fighting against the reality of how technological development actually proceeds. The Stoic approach to technology is to use it as a tool while accepting its limitations and imperfections. You appreciate when technology works well, while not being devastated when it doesn't. You adapt to technological changes while not expecting each change to be an improvement in every way. You understand that technology is created by humans, and therefore subject to human limitations. You don't take technological problems personally or feel that the universe is conspiring against you when your devices malfunction. This approach reduces daily frustrations and allows you to use technology more effectively. When you're not constantly disappointed by technological imperfections, you can work around them more creatively. When you don't expect perfection, you can appreciate the remarkable capabilities that technology does provide. Consider someone whose computer crashes and loses an hour of work. The conventional response might involve intense frustration about the unreliability of technology, anger at the computer manufacturer, and despair about having to redo the lost work. The Stoic response accepts that computer crashes are an occasional reality of using complex technology. This person is disappointed about losing work but not devastated because they weren't expecting perfect reliability. They focus on recovering what they can and implementing better backup systems for the future. They don't waste energy being angry at the technology or feeling victimized by the situation. They adapt to the reality of what happened and take practical steps to prevent similar problems in the future. This approach is more effective because it focuses energy on solutions rather than emotional reactions. When you're not consumed by frustration about technological problems, you can respond to them more skillfully. Now, let's examine how Stoic principles apply to our expectations about entertainment and leisure activities. We often approach entertainment with expectations that can lead to disappointment when our leisure time doesn't provide the satisfaction we anticipated. We expect entertainment to consistently provide enjoyment and relaxation. We expect that spending money on leisure activities will guarantee positive experiences. We expect that popular movies, books, or activities will appeal to us personally. We expect that vacation and leisure time will provide lasting happiness and rejuvenation. These expectations ignore realities about entertainment and leisure. Enjoyment is subjective and influenced by many factors, including mood, expectations, and personal preferences. Spending money doesn't guarantee satisfaction, and popular entertainment doesn't appeal to everyone. Leisure activities can be disappointing for various reasons beyond anyone's control. When you expect entertainment to always provide satisfaction and feel disappointed when it doesn't, you're making your enjoyment dependent on factors largely beyond your control. When you expect leisure time to solve deeper life problems or provide lasting fulfillment, you're asking entertainment to do more than it can reasonably provide. The Stoic approach to entertainment and leisure is to engage in these activities for their own sake, while holding expectations lightly. You choose entertainment based on your preferences, while accepting that not every choice will be satisfying. You appreciate enjoyable experiences without expecting them to provide lasting happiness or solve life problems. You understand that entertainment is a minor part of a meaningful life rather than a primary source of fulfillment. You don't take disappointing entertainment experiences personally, or feel that you've wasted time when leisure activities don't meet your expectations. This approach allows you to enjoy entertainment more fully when it is satisfying while not being devastated when it isn't. You can experiment with different types of leisure activities without the pressure of expectation. You can appreciate simple pleasures without expecting them to transform your life. Consider someone who plans an expensive vacation, expecting it to provide relaxation and rejuvenation. When the trip involves travel delays, disappointing weather, and accommodations that don't match the online photos, they feel that their vacation is ruined. The Stoic traveler accepts that vacations involve many factors beyond individual control. They appreciate positive aspects of the trip while adapting to disappointing elements. They don't expect perfect weather or flawless accommodations, so they're not devastated when reality doesn't match promotional materials. They focus on aspects of the trip they can enjoy, rather than dwelling on disappointments. They might discover unexpected pleasures when they're not rigidly attached to their original expectations for how the vacation should unfold. This approach often leads to more enjoyable travel experiences because there's less emotional energy invested in having everything go according to plan. When you're adaptable rather than expectation-driven, you can make the best of whatever circumstances arise. As we near the end of this exploration, Let's consider how all these principles come together to create a fundamentally different way of experiencing life. When you consistently apply Stoic approaches to expectations and disappointment across all areas of your life, you develop what could be called disappointment immunity. This doesn't mean you become emotionally numb or stop caring about outcomes. It means you care about the right things in the right way. You invest your emotional energy in your choices, your character, your responses to events rather than in outcomes beyond your control. You develop a stable sense of well-being that doesn't fluctuate wildly based on external circumstances. You can experience setbacks without being devastated, successes without becoming overconfident, and changes without being destabilized. This emotional stability allows you to respond to life's challenges with wisdom rather than reactivity. You can make better decisions because they're not driven by anxiety about outcomes or disappointment about how things should be different. You become more resilient because your core sense of self isn't dependent on external validation or specific life circumstances. You can adapt to changing situations more quickly because you're not invested in maintaining illusions about how things should remain the same. Perhaps most importantly, you become more present in your daily life. When you're not constantly projecting into an uncertain future or dwelling on how things should be different, you can engage more fully with what's actually happening right now. This presence allows you to appreciate life's genuine pleasures more fully. When you're not expecting permanent satisfaction from temporary experiences, you can enjoy them for what they are. When you're not disappointed by reality's limitations, you can appreciate its actual gifts. The path to never being disappointed again isn't about lowering your standards or caring less about life. It's about understanding the difference between what you can control and what you cannot, and choosing to focus your emotional investment only on what depends on you. This choice, made consistently over time, transforms your entire experience of being human. You join the ranks of those who have learned to find peace not by changing the world to match their expectations, but by changing their expectations to align with wisdom about how the world actually works. This is the profound freedom that Stoic philosophy offers. Freedom from the tyranny of expectations. Freedom from dependence on external circumstances for your well-being. Freedom to care deeply while remaining emotionally stable. Freedom to work toward goals while finding meaning in the process itself. This freedom is available to anyone willing to do the patient work of examining their expectations, questioning their assumptions about how life should unfold, and gradually learning to find satisfaction in their own choices and character rather than in outcomes beyond their control. The question isn't whether this transformation is possible. Countless people throughout history have achieved it. The question is whether you're willing to begin the practice of choosing acceptance over expectation, process over outcome, character over circumstances. When you make this choice consistently, you discover that disappointment really can be eliminated from human experience. Not through achieving perfect control over life, but through wisdom about what can and cannot be controlled. Not through getting everything you want, but through wanting what you can actually have, a life of meaning, dignity, and peace that no external circumstance can destroy. This is how you never have to be disappointed again. This is the ancient wisdom that remains as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. This is the path to unshakable contentment in an uncertain world. The journey begins with a single step. The next time you feel disappointed, pause and ask yourself what expectation was violated. Trace that expectation back to its source. Ask yourself whether it was realistic, helpful, and within your control. Begin the practice of choosing acceptance over expectation, one moment at a time. This practice, repeated consistently, will gradually transform your entire relationship with disappointment. You will discover that the peace and contentment you've been seeking through external achievements and circumstances was always available through your own choices and responses. This is the ultimate promise of Stoic philosophy. Not a life free from challenges, but a life free from the additional suffering we create through unrealistic expectations and attachment to outcomes beyond our control. This is true freedom, and it's available to you starting right now. Thank you.